So we're going to begin tonight in Luke 16, verse 1, and we're going to be looking to start at what I think is a very peculiar parable for a couple of reasons, and maybe you will also see why it's an odd parable. Maybe you've already read it. If so, let's read it again together, and then we're going to talk about this odd parable as we start tonight. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." The manager said to himself, "What shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses." So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, "And how much do you owe?" 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, "Take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings." And there's more kind of connected to that, but let's start there. Are you like me? Do you find this parable a little strange?
Well,
What do you notice in this parable?
Jesus is commending somebody for being dishonest.
Or at least in the parable, the master commends him for the actions, and Jesus uses him as a positive example of something, right? So the question is, what is he a positive example of? You understand how the story goes, right? He's lost his job as household manager for this wealthy businessman, and so that he doesn't have to wind up begging in the streets, so that maybe he can become attached to some other household as a manager. He decides to cook the books, right? He cooks the books. He cuts the debt that at least some of the master's debtors owe by significant amounts. It's different percentages, but it all comes down to about 500 days' wages, probably, that is cut. So you're talking a significant amount of money that he's cutting off this guy's ledger, cutting out this guy's ledger. And he does this. Why does he do this? What's the point of him doing that?
I think he did it so that he won't be in bad standings with the people that live in that area or whatever. And not only that, if you give a person, they only have to pay back half of what they owe. Well, that's in their favor. It's a good thing. So he figured if he do it that way, then he would still have people that admire him or whatever, respect him. And if he needed a favor, he can get one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. He's doing it to curry favor with people who might later say, "Hey, I hear you're out of work. Why don't you come and manage my household?" And maybe they will, because it doesn't look good on a resume that he was fired for squandering his master's resources, right? So but maybe this will look good. This will look better. It'll be better for him to have people who have heard about his generosity, maybe experienced his generosity, and will hire him. So let's just be real specific here. Is what this guy does okay?
No,
No,
no.
Patrick, he's doing a lot of what goes on in Chicago. You pay the fee. That's exactly what goes on. And
It's
so
Surely not. No,
Jesus would approve of that.
not in our city.
Well, I'm torn. I don't think it's sinful, but morally, it's not the best.
Okay.
Looking at his virtues, but I don't see anything that he does in here that's sinful. Well, it says something about dishonest. Wait a minute, I just saw a little bit. Whoever tried. Oh no, that's not. That's verse 10. So that's how I think about it. That he's shrewd. And it is like people in Chicago. Plus more, of course, with our politicians here. But again, I don't see sin. I just see maybe not as high of a work ethic that we would think a Christian would have.
Now, Jesus does call him in verse 8, he calls him the dishonest manager, right? Now, is that because of what has happened before that's caused his job to be in danger? Or is it because of what happens now? I tend to think it's maybe a combination of those things. I mean, it's one of those things where it depends on who you're rooting for, right? Some interpreters, people go all over the place with this parable. I've got, I think, one of the best books on the parables I've ever seen, and it goes through and it sort of lists the historic ways people have interpreted these parables. This one has about, I'm not kidding, I believe it's 19 different interpretations attached to it by different people at different times in history. And some of those interpretations say things like, well, all he did was he took away the interest that he shouldn't have been charging anyway, because the old law says you shouldn't charge them. Law of Moses says you shouldn't charge interest to your fellow Jews.
Doesn't say that.
Doesn't say that, does it? That's my chief objection. It doesn't say that that's what he
I mean,
did.
that would be extremely absorbent interest.
It would be a huge amount of interest, and that's the point some of these people make. This would have been a huge amount of interest that he got. Except it doesn't say that. I mean, you can sort of insert all sorts of interesting little twists into parables when you don't care if it really says that or not.
I think if you're trying to find a justification for what the shrewd manager has done, you're missing the point of the parable.
Okay.
Because Jesus says the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own time than on people's life. He's contrasting sinful people against righteous people.
And it is exactly the shrewd activities of this manager that Jesus says are an example. Not that we ought to be ripping people off, and in fact, I think Jesus was saying just the opposite. But that the point of the parable, and this is the thing about parables, very often, most of the time, there's one major point that's being made. And you can't get too far away from that major point or you're going to get lost in the weeds. So the major point of comparison is the manager's shrewd use of money to win friends for himself. And he says that's what people of the light ought to be doing with money. Now, who are the people of the light?
Christians, people
Those
who
that
believe in
follow
Jesus.
Jesus.
Yeah, people who follow Jesus, disciples, Christians, all those answers are correct, right? People who want to be part of the kingdom of God, all good ways of describing who Jesus is discussing. And his point is that people of the light also ought to be shrewd in using money for the things they want. So let's keep reading. I tell you, verse 9, use worldly wealth, mammon is the word that's often used there, to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So you see what's in view here, right? Jesus is saying, use the wealth that you have, the worldly wealth that you have, with a view toward the eternal dwellings, remember, the man wanted to be connected to a new household. So Jesus says that the eternal dwellings that you'll be welcomed into, use the mammon, the worldly wealth that you have now with that in view. Use wealth in this world with your eye on the next world and the eternal dwellings that that you want to be a part of. And he goes on to say, to sort of drive it home, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, that's the little here, right? Who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? Remember, this guy is a manager answerable to a master, right? And Jesus is saying, so are you. So are we. We're managers answerable to a master. And that's the way we ought to see it as we use worldly wealth in this world. That's what we ought to be thinking of. That's what we ought to be considering. Verse 13 then is, no one can serve two masters. Either you'll hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Again, it's an odd little parable because of that, the way we sort of lift up and hold, Jesus sort of holds up as an example, this man who behaves in this kind of shrewd manner. I started to say a minute ago, what you think about his activities has to do with who you're rooting for, right? And I mean, if you were the guy who had this debt owed, I don't think you think what he did was okay, although he does say, hey, good job, buddy. Bravo, that was good thinking. He is able to at least, sort of recognize that the guy has been smart in the way he spent the last day on the job, right?
I'm also not sure it's great advice just from a purely pragmatic perspective. Because would you really hire someone who had done that?
Yes, right. I mean, yeah, again, parables only go so far, right? There's always things that sort of don't work exactly right. But you get the point of, the main point of comparison. It's like this, and we ought to use worldly wealth in ways that have to do with the household we want to be a part of, God's household, and the master that we're answerable to. Comments or thoughts or questions or discussion?
Well, I've always looked at it more broadly that it talks about worldly wealth, but then the master says are more astute than the otherworldly in dealing with their own kind. I've always taken it in, a lot of aspects of life. It's thinking about the future. It's planning. It's realizing that there's going to come a tomorrow. And I think how you plan for your money, how you plan for other aspects of your life are important.
Sure, I think you're right. I mean, obviously the main context here is the wealth, but you're right, it goes beyond that. And mammon as a word is actually in some of the older translations, but not in this one. Not the NIV, often has to do with more than just dollars in a bank account. It often has to do with, with the things you're talking about, the stuff that life is made of, and how you
financial plans with professional advisors, but we take our spiritual lives kind of from day to day, or, without really thinking, where am I going to be next month, next year?
It's almost, in verse 9, I've just been reading it over and over and over. It almost sounds like the worldly wealth, the blessings that we have, instead of holding on to them, give it away, meet the needs of others, serve others, and that you will be taken care of. And I always laugh because my oldest sister, and she does a lot of serving in her church back home. And she always says, oh, just give. She always says, just give. God will give it back. Just do it. God, don't worry about it. Just give it away. And I was thinking about her as I was reading. It's almost like that, and I'm not refuting what Alan just said. Of course, we need to plan, but it's the heart of letting go and giving and using what we've been blessed with so it can, God will prepare a place for us and we'll be taken care of, basically.
Yeah. And that's exactly, I think, the point, that long view, right? That, all right, this is coming to an end. And I need to, and this, you know, this wealth isn't gonna do me any good, if I don't use it in a way that acknowledges my belief that there are other dwellings I'm gonna be part of, and there's another world that I'm looking forward to, and I wanna use my wealth and my life here to prepare for that.
What if you read it a little bit more like wealth and riches as, you know, the kingdom or the gospel, the good news, and we're to manage, you know, we need to share the good news. We've been given a wealth, we've been given a gift, and we have to be good managers, not necessarily of an actual dollar bill, but of the message.
Yeah. I mean, this whole notion, right, that we have a master that we're answerable to. We have a master whose business we're supposed to be about. And
Because it was like a relationship. When he was being shrewd, he was developing these relationships. And maybe we need to develop relationships. Like LinkedIn for Christ.
I was just in connection with that, we've been talking on Sunday morning about how Paul refers to the gospel as being entrusted to him, and he has a responsibility to do something with it.
I mean, that's a common way of thinking in Paul and Jesus's world because of the presence of these, you know, these households, right? And where you had people who were placed over the household, sometimes a servant, more often a professional person whose their job is to manage the assets. And so, yeah, it would be a very easy way of talking about lots of different things. I would agree with all that. I would just point out that the point Jesus seems to be making is specifically here how we use our wealth, how we use our money. He says you can't serve both God and money, right? There's only one master that you can serve, and you're going to love the one and hate the other. And I say that because it's you know, one of the ways we keep score in our world is with money, right? With resources, how we use the wealth that we have. And I think Jesus over and over again emphasizes generosity and giving away what we have to those who are in need. And so that said, all those other things are also, of course, very true. Notice the Pharisees in verse 14, who love money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. Maybe we're painting with kind of a broad brush. All the Pharisees probably didn't love money, but there was enough of a tendency among them that Luke could say the Pharisees, at least the ones we're talking about here, love money, and because of that, they did not like what Jesus said, and they were making fun of what Jesus said. And he said to them, "You're the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight." It's about getting our values straight, right? Getting what is valuable to us, what is important to us straight. We've already talked about the idea of treasure in heaven, and this is along the same lines. Other comments, other thoughts?
Now, Patrick, I think one point that he might be trying to make kind of sideways here has to do with the subject of boldness. This man is acting very bold, right? Concerning his boss's customers. Most of us wouldn't even think of doing what he's doing here, but he's doing it. He's being very bold on his own behalf. So Jesus is bringing this out. He's a bold person, and maybe there's times in our lives when we need to be bold when it's handling our money or it's sharing Jesus with other people. So it's part of the Christian life, at times to be bold. You can't do that, 24/7 or anything, but there are times we're to be bold, about things of Christ. So I think that might be kind of like a side issue he might be trying to bring out through the example of this very bold manager.
Yeah, he does. I mean, he does make a bold course of action here.
Right.
That's maybe part of the example that sometimes what has to happen in the way we value things in our world, and the way we have to make tough decisions. We like to watch Jeopardy, and we've been watching the Jeopardy Masters tournament. Anybody paying attention to the Jeopardy Masters tournament? Every Daily Double, they went all in. Talk about bold, right? Every Daily Double, these because they knew that they're playing against other great players. So every Daily Double, they go all in. Every Daily Double, one after the other, they go all in, and it makes for good TV, and it's pretty exciting. And maybe that's part of it, right? That we're all in for what we're looking forward to, the residences, the dwellings that we want to be a part of through eternity. We're all in for those things, and we make our decisions based on those things, and that looks very bold sometimes to people who are looking from other perspectives. But actually, what the guy did makes perfect sense, right? in the world of the parable, what he does makes perfect sense. It seems bold if you're thinking from another point of view, but from his point of view, made all sense in the world.
Hi, Patrick.
Hey, Jacob.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the parable here is very, interested in the sense that I think Jesus is directing this to the religious leaders then, the way they find a way to acquire money from the people, but they don't use the message to let the people get to the kingdom. That is one part of it. He's not saying that being rich is wrong, but the way to have the rich and then how you use the riches, that is the wrong. If the riches let you into the sin, then you get it wrong. But I think then Jesus wants to let the Pharisees know their move, but he don't want to tell them in direct way, but speaking in parables for them if they will understand. Because I can see that even Matthew 23:2, the way he says the things here, and the Romans chapter 3 verse 2, the way he says things here, that means he wants them to use the spiritual aspects of the money they are having to support the people more than acquiring the money from the people, but pushing the people into, poverty.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, obviously, in lots of different ways, human beings can go about trying to enrich themselves at the expense of other people. And religious people are not immune to that temptation. And that happens too often in churches and other religious organizations. And yes, the Pharisees, these religious leaders, ought to have a special responsibility. We're going to spend some time with that in just a minute because of their connection to the law and the prophets, right? Their interest in keeping the law, and they should, through that, know exactly what God says about care for the poor, for instance, and in this case, often that wasn't happening, and so that's why he says in verse 15, "You justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts, and He knows you've got your values all mixed up." So we have in verses 16 through 18 a little bit of an odd sounding few verses. We'll talk about them just sort of at face value, and then I want to go back as we get through this chapter and make some connections. But verse 16, "The law and the prophets were proclaimed until John. Since that time, the good news of the kingdom of God is being preached, and everyone is, it could mean forcing their way in. It could mean, everyone is urged to enter. Depends on whether you translate it as middle or passive. And, so there's some debate. NIV goes, everyone is forcing their way into it. I kind of slightly prefer the idea of being urged or exhorted to enter. What Jesus is saying is that there's been a change of era, right? That the law and the prophets were proclaimed up until John, and then starting with John, or maybe inclusive of John, the kingdom is being preached. The good news of the kingdom of God is being preached. Not that the kingdom of God didn't exist before that, but this idea that Jesus preached, that the kingdom of God is near. You can enter, and people are entering and are urged to enter. It's easier for heaven and earth to disappear than for the least stroke of a pen to drop out of the law. And I think that means just because we're entering a different era doesn't mean you shouldn't still care about what God said in the law and the prophets. There's a great story that rabbis a few years after Jesus started telling about how the tiny letter that God took out of Sarah's name when he made her Sarah. I remember she was Sarai and she became Sarah. The tiny letter complained to God for generations until he added it to the name of Joshua. and the whole idea, I think, of that is the value of the law and the fact that you can't change the law. You can't just, drop letters. And Jesus is saying the same thing. It's the idea that the least stroke of a pen shouldn't drop out of the law. And then verse 18, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery. And the man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Often people reflect on how odd this sounds right here, but I think it connects back to what he's saying about the law and prophets. As an example, he quotes this divorce law, that you don't take divorce lightly, as probably was easy in his culture. We know there were debates about on what grounds a husband could divorce his wife, a wife could not divorce her husband. And Jesus was very, very strict on divorce, and in fact, probably stricter than any of the other rabbis around him on that.
And interestingly enough, it's rather personal for him, considering that Joseph had the opportunity to set her.
That's right. That's right.
And chose not to.
That's right. Joseph had the chance to put Mary away, and did not do so. So the importance of keeping those vows, and we know, of course, that Jesus made exceptions for on this rule, at least one. But then Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 may give some leeway to the one who is divorced. But you get the point that he's wanting to emphasize the importance of marriage as a way of pointing out that what God said about marriage in the law still should be valued and still should be acknowledged. It's easier for heaven and earth to disappear than for the least stroke of a pen to drop out of the law. So then there's another weird parable right after this, in verse 19. Now, some people argue this isn't a parable. They argue that mainly because one of the characters is named, and that is unusual. That is odd. I didn't find too many New Testament scholars who would acknowledge who would say that this wasn't a parable. It comes in a collection of parables. It begins with some language that Jesus often uses to begin parables. Whether you think it's a parable or not, it's an odd story. It's an odd story. And I think you'll see how it connects with some of what we've already talked about. So I'll just read it, verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you're in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us. So I'll pause right there. And I want to just make sure you get the strength of the parable here. Do you see some reversals in the parable? You've got a beggar laying at Lazarus's gates, covered with sores, begging for a scrap of food that falls from the table, right? And then after death, and after, as these two go to what is called in the parable Hades, probably the
Place of the dead.
the place of the dead, the equivalent to the Old Testament Sheol. There in the place of the dead, you see Abraham and the rich man at a banquet table eating, and you have the rich man, I said backwards, Abraham and Lazarus at a banquet table eating, and the rich man on the other side of a chasm, not a gate this time, a chasm, right? And he wants just a drop of water because he's in agony in this fire that is in this place where he's in Hades. You see the reversal, right? It's pretty obvious, and Jesus goes to great lengths to make that connection. This reversal, yeah.
The rich man doesn't just want water, he wants Lazarus to bring it.
And that's
Yeah.
interesting, isn't it? That's interesting. It's sin. It's almost like he's still
Same mindset.
got the same mindset. Lazarus is the lower class, and he ought to be serving me, even though things have changed. And Abraham says, "No, son, things have changed," and it's not. And notice also the connection of you had your good things, and Lazarus was in misery. Well, there's been a reversal now. Lazarus now has his good things, and you're in misery. You're in that. You see the point, right? And you see how it connects with the parable that came earlier in the chapter of the unjust steward. Using wealth to gain eternal dwellings for yourself. Now there's some struggles here people have with this sometimes. Well, you know, is Jesus saying that you have to give away a certain percentage? Are we earning our way into heaven? And I don't think any of that's really Jesus's point, and not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the idea that if you believe in the kingdom, if you put your faith in Jesus, it ought to change your perspective and your value system. It ought to be making you consider things differently. And if you're not, then maybe you don't understand the kingdom. Maybe you don't understand what you're being called to. Maybe that's something you need to be considering. Because there is this expectation that you will behave in a certain way because you believe in this promise that God has made you of life.
What I find interesting is that the beggar is at his gate. He didn't have to go far to find the beggar.
That's right.
it's just like I'm blinded. His values were not shown in caring for others. And I think that's what it says back in verse 15, that what people value highly is detestable in God's sight. And
Yeah.
that what he valued was not what God wanted him to do with his money. I mean, even place the beggar at his gate. And if you're wealthy and all of this, you know who's at your gate. You know, it's kind of like somebody ringing my doorbell, and I ignore it. If
Yeah.
they're-
And I'd even go so far as to say, I'm not sure that even if he didn't know, that excuses it.
I agree. Yeah.
Because part of the point, I think, is he should have known. Whether he did or didn't, he should have known. He should have been aware. He should have had his eyes open enough to see the world beyond his banquet table and beyond his mansion and his gate. And he didn't, because he was blinded. He had the value system all messed up.
Mhm.
And that's sort of the unsettling thing for me too. That maybe, do I just not see like I should? Am I just not as aware as I ought to be? And I believe in God's grace. I believe if we recognize that and see that and want to have better vision, God will give us that and help us with that. But anyway.
But I think the key there is if we are always checking our own value system out.
Yeah.
That will keep us straight.
Yeah.
Because if I'm trying to be kind and be generous, I'm checking that out enough that I trust God that I'm going to blow it and he's got me, grace is sufficient, but my work should be consistent as far as where's my values? What are my values here? Why am I spending money on this? Or why am I ignoring this person? Or do I see everybody? And or not everybody, but the people that I need to see. So that's my work, is to be aware of what my value system is, and am I aligning my behavior, my friends, everything to that value.
One of the most unchristian things I hear sometimes, and unfortunately sometimes I hear it from Christians, something like it is, I work for everything I have. They why should I then have to give to somebody else? And I hear that too often. And that's maybe one of the most anti-Christian things I can think of to say. Because it does ignore the need around us, and it just refuses to look at the need around us and the ways that we can make a difference. God can use us to make a difference. So I want to keep reading here because there's a little bit more in the story of the rich man Lazarus. He answered, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus," there he is sending Lazarus again, right? "Send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone from the dead goes to them, they'll repent." He said to them, "If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." So there's your connection back to Moses and the prophets.
I think I see that the Pharisees would take the place of the rich man, and the Lazarus, the disciples would see themselves as Lazarus. Okay, and whether you want to take Abraham as the father or Jesus, that referring back to what Jesus had to say about the kingdom of God, that the Pharisees sneered, okay, they love money, you can't love money or God. Then the kingdom of God has been preached and people are coming into it. But what are the Pharisees doing? They're not really, they're not really interested in, they're more interested in the money than they are in serving God. So I see that out of the parable. Also, that there seems to be some indication, maybe I might be too, I might be like, how can I say, maybe reading a little bit too much into the parable, but we often ask the question like, well, why can't God give us a second chance after death? Okay. You know, like purgatory, like, oh man, I did all these rotten things, and why can't there be a purgatory for me? It sounds like if you're not going to repent at this time, you have no interest in repenting, you know, at all. I mean, you know, even if you experience the torment of hell and are forgiven and, you know, released, that you have no interest whatsoever of at this time repenting. In other words, you're not interested in repenting now. What makes you think you're going to repent in the future when, you know, and how many chances do you need to correct your repentance? In other words, if God were to give you a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance, okay, how many more times do you need to get it right? It's just this thought that's going into I've been thinking.
Yeah, like what, you know, think about what what the law and the prophets, I can't talk. I almost said the Moses and the prophets. Think about what the law and the prophet says about the poor, for instance, right? I mean, the law had specific rules for dealing with those who don't have enough. And even in the law, there's the line that Jesus later quotes: "You will always have the poor with you." Right? There are always going to be people around you who are in need, and the law had specific instructions on how to deal with it. You get to the prophets, and over again, you have the prophets lambasting the people of Israel for not caring for the poor, and in fact, even cheating the poor, right? And cheating those who are weak. The word was there, right? The word was always there of how the poor should be treated. And Lazarus is told, or the rich man is told in this parable, if your brothers won't hear that, what makes you think they're really going to hear it when somebody? And this is not Christmas Carol, right? This is not Jacob Marley coming back from the dead. This is real life, sort of. And the fact is that all along they should have been listening to what God said through the law and prophets.
I think it'd be nice if we could settle tonight the big controversy over the last 20 centuries, right? Is this a true story or is it a parable? I tend to think it's a little of both.
I believe it's a parable.
I think it's a true story though to it, because they use he uses the name Lazarus, and he does not normally do that. He does not give it a specific name in other parables. It's always kept general. So I think there's some teaching here about what happens after we die. That's my personal opinion. Everybody's going to have their own opinion, but I think that's kind of how it's going to play out, and that's why Jesus said it, and it's, you know, for our benefit, you know.
I think it is a story that contains great truth about how we ought to be aware of the poor among us and how we'll be responsible for that.
Right.
And
I think it could be both.
God has always said we should.
Don't you think a true story though could be an earthly story with a heavenly meaning? That's what a parable is. So I think it could be both.
My understanding, parables are fictional stories. Okay, I mean, they're not lies, they're just fictional stories. Okay, you know, but there's a point that is reality, but we have nothing in I don't know of anything in the epistles or in the gospels, you know, that the dead are able to communicate, you know, across.
Yeah. It's an odd view of the afterlife, if it's true. Something difficult for us to sort of fit into other views of the afterlife we probably have. But I mean,
good point. Have to research it.
I don't know. Other than that, I don't know what to tell you. Smarter people than me look at it and go, "That's a parable," and smarter people than me probably look at it and go, "It's not a parable." I think it bears the markings of a parable. It's in a series with several parables. It uses some language, especially at the beginning, that makes it sound like Jesus is telling a parable. I think you'd expect, if you were just listening to Jesus, that you would be expecting to hear a parable as he told this story. But that's about all I know.
Is it only in Luke?
It's only Luke.
No, we have to think
Only
about it. Yes, sleep
Yeah.
on it.
It's one of those that is only a part of Luke. He where he got it, we don't know. But
To teach us a lesson.
yeah, well, obviously that's yeah, but where it comes from, it didn't come from Mark. It didn't come from the material that Luke and Matthew share. Where it came from, I don't.
You know what, I was thinking too, Patrick, and
Yeah.
everybody, we have to be careful that when we think about wealth, I think if you're like me, we think a certain number makes us wealthy. We want to qualify our possessions or our money, and then we say, I'm rich. But this is for all of us, that we pay attention to those that are needy around us, that I can't exempt myself because I'm not a millionaire. You know, I can't exempt myself because, I don't know, I don't live in a mansion. But regardless, this is, I'm to give to other people regardless of how much money I have, that I'm to see myself as rich, especially when there's a needy person that I can help. And I think that changes things, because it's easy to,
Sorry.
I'm done.
Yeah. We all have our gates, we all have our front doors, we all have the places we go behind which we kind of want to be insulated from the bad stuff in the world around us. And I don't think that's a bad thing to retreat and rest and recuperate and pray and you know, be with those you love. But we can't just make that life. You know, we can't just hide behind those insulated gates and ignore the needs around us. And we have to be aware of those things. Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, Patrick,
Yes.
please, I'm thinking of something here. Being a parable, but at the same time, Jesus was referring to the rich man, or Abraham was referring to the rich man that the brothers left out should go and listen to Moses and other prophets. Then even if somebody resurrected and come back to tell them if they will believe, they will believe. Jesus resurrected, do they people believe now? That is another point. Two, I think Lazarus is not need something that the rich man don't have, or he's in need of a rich man real food to eat. No, but Lazarus was just begging for the left out that the rich man don't even want to consume again. Those are things that Lazarus wants, just for the body to feel something better. But the rich man like this, he has everything it is in this life, so that his flesh in this life is sustained freshly. But after death, he didn't know that the soul, you need to work on the soul on this life before getting, after death, your soul can be another, resurrected to another thing. Rich man don't know about that. So this parable is telling us to see to it that today our riches on this earth is going to buy us our spiritual death tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, much like the parable of the unjust manager, right? The idea of using what you have in this world to influence the next world, and yeah. All right, what time is it? We're almost done. I don't wanna jump into chapter 17, any other thoughts about this chapter,
Patrick,
these sort of the way the parables and the teaching all sort of connect, or the stories and the teaching all sort of connect here, with one another, and with the idea of how, how we take God's values, should be taking God's values into account in the way that we conduct ourselves in this world, particularly with the possessions we have and the money we have. How do we take that seriously and recognize that very often that's how we show our discipleship. That's how we show that we're following Jesus. By the way we use the gifts He's given us, and the way we manage that estate He's put us in charge of.
I think this parable or story, whatever we want to call it, will help us to take God's values seriously, because it shows how God ultimately is a great equalizer between rich and poor.
Yeah.
That should make us think seriously about anything Jesus has tried to teach us, or God in the Bible.
Those who humble themselves will be exalted. Those who exalt themselves will be humbled. You see that in the story of the rich man and Lazarus. The hungry will be well fed, and the well fed will be hungry. Jesus talked about that as well, and you see it again in that parable, that story. It's a very vivid, powerful lesson. And in between those two stories, this teaching about how you listen to the law and prophets and care for those around us and be trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, so that God will give us true riches. Again, we're learning, we're growing, right? This isn't something we get from day one. This is something that most of us have to learn and struggle with and figure out over time. How do we do this? How do we take this seriously? It's enough, I think, that we are working on that and trying to take those things seriously. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for your good comments and thoughts. Good to see everybody. We'll pick up in chapter 17 next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have
Everybody.
a good evening.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Bye.
Big week.
Night.